All right, continue with the lecture. Let me quickly go over this one more time. So all of this is known as the triangular trade. Okay, this is also known as the Atlantic slave trade. As you can see, this is in between the ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean. So in the Americas, they send raw materials. For example, let's say cotton. That's an unfinished good. Europe is going to use that cotton to turn it into something, and that'll be like clothing. Okay, they have textile factories here. They're gonna send those clothing to Africa, and a lot of powerful leaders in Africa, they're gonna exchange that for slaves. Okay, they're gonna capture people and then have them exported as slaves from Africa to the Americas. Now, this route right here, this is very important. This route is known as the Middle Passage. Again, what is it called? The Middle Passage. So again, in the Americas, they sent raw materials that are unfinished goods. Okay. In Europe, they're going to convert that into manufactured goods to Africa. And in exchange, okay, Africa will be providing the slave labor to the Americas. Okay. So think of it this: Americas is agriculture, farming, just pulling out things. That's primary sector. They send all those unfinished goods to Europe. Europe has factories. Okay, they're gonna convert all those raw materials and the secondary to Africa, and Africa is gonna provide the slave labor. They're gonna send African slaves through here. This route is known as the Middle Passage. Okay, and we're gonna go over exactly what the Middle Passage is about. And again, it's not a pleasant ride. There's not where like everybody has a seat or they have their own beds and whatnot. Okay. So I provided some questions. How long is what century did Europeans begin to enslave Africans? And your answer should have been take 1 or 2 minutes to answer those two questions. What century did Europeans begin to enslave Africans? And then did part of the African population help Europeans trade other Africans? Again, take about 1 or 2 minutes. Press pause and then press play when you're ready. All right, so this practice of enslaving Africans began in the 16th century. That will be the 1500s. And did Africans, part of the African population, help Europeans trade other Africans? Unfortunately, yes. Okay. And again, this is just driven by economic greed. Okay. All right. For the next part, I'm gonna go over the lecture. This picture right here, I guarantee you're gonna see this in 8th grade. This is a very frequent primary source that is used a lot. Okay, and I'll explain what that is in a bit. All right, Africans who were kidnapped were treated worse than animals. They were forced onto large ships where they were forced to ride chained together in an area where they could barely move and often could not sit up, and certainly couldn't stand up. On some ships, half of the people died from these conditions, their bodies remaining chained to the living below deck. The ships traveled from Africa to the Americas. This route became known as the Middle Passage. So going back to our map right here, from Africa to the Americas, the route right here is known as the Middle Passage. All right, so I provided two questions for that key point. Take 1 or 2 minutes to answer those two questions. Press pause and then press play when you're ready. All right, so the route from Africa to the Americas was known as what? And that will be the Middle Passage. And for your second question, what were the conditions of enslaved Africans in the African ship? Not pleasant, horrendous. Okay, they couldn't stand up. They allowed them to succumb to debt, and I will be providing primary sources. You can see what they had to endure in a bit right now. Okay, so going back to this right here, this is a actual picture composed by somebody. So this is the deck. That means it's like the bottom of the ship. Okay. And if you see, you can barely see small little lines right here. This is supposed to represent Africans. Okay. Each individual little line that you see right there, I know they're super small, that's the head. So now, and this is one layer. And if you go to another layer, you can see even more. Okay, it wasn't a couple of people, it wasn't like 100 people, it was like close to like almost like 500 people. Okay, all compressed, okay, in the bottom, all forced together, okay, because they realized that in order to have more slaves to sell, okay, they have to pack as many as they can, and they know that not all of them are going to live, but that's fine. So they can pack, they can say, for example, bring 100 and then 85 make it. If they bring 500 and only 300 make it, then they'll be okay because now they have 300. So there was a complete disregard for human life, and then this is a horrendous practice, and unfortunately, this is one of the darkest scars in human history that we have that happened. So, and again, it's very important to understand the past in order to understand the living conditions that we are on today. Okay, moving on to the next part of the lesson. In your notes, okay, most of the enslaved people kidnapped in Africa were shipped to the Americas to work on plantations. This is a big word you're gonna see in 8th grade. That means huge farms. They're there in order to make a profit. Profit means making money for white Europeans. The cash crops, okay, those are crops that you can grow easily. And your examples are sugarcane, cotton, and others, okay, like tobacco as well. Being grown in European colonies in America require lots of laborers. Since enslaved people did not receive any money for their work, slavery became very important to the economy of the Americas, including the United States. Okay, this is a little drawing made by an artist who, based on prime ministers, who depict what a plantation will look like. This is acres after acres of land where they're just growing crops. Okay, and unfortunately, this is a practice that was heavily done in the early years of the United States. Okay. All right. So I provided to see a few questions. Take 1-2 minutes to answer those questions. Press pause and press play when you're done. Again, take about 1 or 2 minutes, and it's based on this key point right here. All right. So what were the two dominant cash crops? And that's going to be sugarcane and cotton. Okay. There's more, but these were the most prevalent ones that they're common in the Americas. Which nations relied on slavery? Okay, I should have been specific. If you put the Americans, that's fine, yeah. And also continent, that will be Europe. Okay. Unfortunately, Europe did not have slavery as to the extent as the Americas, but they depended on the Americas because the Americans were providing the raw materials through slave labor. So they depended on the Americans to, unfortunately, do the horrendous practice of having slaves, because of course the Americans were not paying the slaves, and then the Americans were making a lot of money, and then the Europeans benefited because they were getting a lot of raw materials at a cheap cost. Okay, we're gonna move on to the next part of the lesson, the lecture. All right. Most of the Africans who were kidnapped were young, even children. Many leaders in the communities, their abduction destroyed African communities and tore apart families. Okay, so in this picture, this is an auction, okay, in the Americas, where a lot of the African families were broken apart. They arrived to the Americas. Once they arrived, they were immediately put into an auction, and then you have a bunch of white Europeans who will be sitting there, and they'll be buying them off. Okay, they'll buy. Usually, they bought men because young men because they knew that they were going to be working hard, but they were pricier. Elderly are going to be worth less because they're already not in their prime. Children will be also not as expensive because we have to get them ready, you have to feed them, prepare them. And women range in almost the same price as young women, as the same price as adult males as well. Okay, and unfortunately, this is the conditions that they had to endure, and it was very common, unfortunately, that a lot of families were broken apart during this time. All right. Descendants of African slaves have enriched the cultures of the Americas. For example, in the United States, African Americans have contributed greatly to the American music throughout the last 200 years, as well as sharing languages, customs, and traditions. Okay, so in the last 200 years, despite all this horrendous practices that was going on in the Americas, There was an infusion of the African culture into the Americas. The effects are still lingering today. Descendants of African slaves have faced centuries of mistreatment and discrimination in the Americas, including in the United States. Even today, darker skin can lead to unequal treatment, as privilege is still unequally distributed between light-skinned European descendants and darker-skinned indigenous and African descendants. Okay. I provided a question in your notes. What were the changes and continuities of since the abolishment of slavery? This one, I want you guys to take about 3 to 4 minutes. Now, these 2 words, I guarantee you're going to see this in 7th grade. You're going to be writing an essay. Changes and continuities. So, in the last 200 years, actually 150 years almost, okay, since the abolishment of slavery in the United States, which is in 1865, what has changed for the African American population, but what still continues for the African American population? Okay, so you can refer back to your notes right here from here, this bullet point from this two bullet points to see what changed and what has continued. Changes means like it could have been, it just aggravated the situation, make it worse, or there could have been positive change. And in continuities means that, okay, despite this major change, which means the end of slavery, what still continues today? So again, take about 3 to 4 minutes for this question. All right, so some of the changes, of course, the biggest change will be the abolishment of slavery. One of the changes is in the Americas, in the United States, for example, there's been an infusion of culture. So a lot of the traditions that Africans had in Africa, they brought it over to the Americans. Okay, languages, okay, also resonated into the Americas. Okay, music also still, you can feel the lingering effects. Okay, like jazz music. Okay, the Harlem Renaissance that happened in New York, things of that sort. Unfortunately, what are some continuities? Okay, so if you wrote this down for continuities, okay, this will be correct. Some of the things that still continue despite slavery being over is discrimination. And unfortunately, the concept of race and skin color is still measured in society as a way to have a status, okay? And this is something, again, that we're going to refer a lot next year in 7th grade when we talk about the civil rights movement, especially with MLK. We'll be talking about Martin Luther King on his speech on the disparities between races, okay? All right, that concludes our lesson. So now all you're required, you guys, again, keep these notes. This is for you when it comes to our unit exam to study. You're going to go to Teams. Once you're done with this, go to General. The assignment is already posted. You can view assignment, I guess, through here. Or you can go to assignments right here. Click on that. And then it should be Unit 5, Lesson 4, Exit Ticket. When you're done, just turn it in. And I'll provide redos. And again, the only way to get full credit is if you justify your incorrect answers, okay? So with that said, enjoy your weekend. Get some rest. If you have any questions, just contact me through a chat box or through your mind, and I'll get to you as soon as possible. Okay, with that said, just have a good day. All right, I'll see y'all.